Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Creating and Implementing a Test Automation Strategy for Mobile App Quality, sponsored by Kobaton. I'm Jacob Lukowitz, Multimedia Editor of SD Times. Before we get started, I have a couple of quick housekeeping announcements. First, this webinar will be recorded and available on demand through the sdtimes.com website about 24 hours after the event. Secondly, if at any time you have any questions about or during the presentation, you may submit them using the chat. Now moving on to today's webinar topic. Test automation has proven to be a significant impact on software development and the efficiency of your organization, but many companies are struggling to make the move to automation on mobile and face enormous pressure to increase speed to market. We'll discuss the value and importance of implementing an automation strategy for mobile in order to maximize business growth and to avoid common troubles when getting started. Our speaker today is Shannon Lee, Solutions Engineer and DevOps Evangelist at Kobaton. Great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Jacob. Appreciate it.
Great. And to get things started, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, awesome. So once again, in this webinar, really going over mobile test automation. We're kind of take a look at the complexities of just that, and then how to move forward the best automation strategy and approach. So to get started, quick agenda for today. Introduction. So once again, thank you, Jacob. My name is Shannon Lee. I am the Solutions Engineer for Kobaton with a focus of dev evangelism. So really here to bring the good word of technology to everyone, especially in the mobile application space. In this webinar, we'll go over we'll set the foundation for the challenges of mobile test automation and what makes it so difficult to achieve. And then we'll move into how to implement a good test automation strategy, and then choosing the right tools to implement that strategy, as well as executing that strategy. I will have time at the end for questions if anyone has any questions, but of course, feel free to ask your questions throughout the webinar as well. All right, first things first, to kick off, I'm going to do a quick poll. Hi to everyone. What is the primary strategic driver for your organization pursuing a test automation strategy? Is it improve app functionality? Is it improve user experience? Is it reducing that time to market, or reducing the cost? And we'll throw the polls in there. Also, as an intro, if you all are in the chat and would like to share who you are, where you're from, by all means, we can make this more of a conversation type webinar as well than just me speaking through slides. I'll go first. I am an Atlanta native, so based in Atlanta, so in the southeast of the US, where it's getting pretty hot, and we're actually hitting triple digits not too long ago. Luckily, we got some rain, so it's not terrible. I'm gonna get just another second. So I'm seeing majority is to improve app functionality. Absolutely. I think a lot of the latest trends as well is really reducing that time to market. So a traditional agile approach is a sprint every 2 weeks. Now we're seeing a new trend of the continuous integration to continuous deployment, where you have the full software development lifecycle automated. So why wait 2 weeks when you're ready to deliver tomorrow kind of scenario? So again, reducing that time to market, I think, is a really big driver also. And then in turn, that does reduce costs and it does improve user experience. And then of course you want to ensure that your app functionally works so that nothing escapes into production, and you can quickly catch that by making use of mobile test automation. Okay, so let's take a moment to look at the top challenges of mobile test automation and why it is so hard to kind of move forward in that approach. I'm going to do a quick kind of comparison and with a little bit of a history lesson, more or less, between web automation as well as mobile automation. So comparing web development and web automation, and comparing that to mobile app development and in turn mobile app automation. So, we're all familiar with the web. Really came through in the early 90s, mid 90s, where the rules of the road were really easy. Everyone was kind of, I think, just super excited to have this, World Wide Web available, and everyone was kind of in communication with one another. Okay, let's do this. Let's do this. Everyone was really synergizing in developing web applications and development that in turn made it easy to also have web automation available also. I'm not sure if y'all are familiar with Selenium, but Selenium was, I would say, is kind of the pioneer in automation. And so since Selenium, though, there have been other frameworks that have been introduced for web development, such as Cypress and other more web application automation. But when we look at mobile app development, we really didn't see that until, into the 2000s, into the late 2010s. And the kind of annoying part is that web, everyone was so synergized. Everyone was like, yeah, let's make it all, more friendlier to develop together. Whereas mobile application, we really saw kind of that capitalism come in place, where we are now divided. We have Android platform, we have iOS platform. iOS platform really only works well with other iOS tools, whereas Android's a little bit more agnostic and open. For example, the rules of the road got a little bit more complicated. Apple said if you want to create an Apple application, you have to create it in Swift, or Objective-C. You have to kind of abide by these rules. And they really set a precedent of kind of just making it difficult to develop an iOS application. And same could be said for Android, just also given the more complexity. So here we are from the 90s to late 2000s, a 20 year in technologies where mobile devices are far more complex than your web browser and web applications. So with that, there are frameworks that have been released as well. So Selenium created web automation, not created web automation, but pioneered web automation. They really saw the issue with device fragmentation regarding mobile app automation. So they created Appium, which is also a open source framework, but it's Appium is fantastic and can really help drive automation on your device. But it does come with its lack of functionality, just trying to stay on par with the complexities that is mobile applications on mobile devices. So web development, web automation is a little bit easier to achieve versus mobile applications and mobile app development and automation is a little bit harder, and of course comes with the own complexities that coincides with mobile devices. So I think that's getting into one of my slides. So this is another issue that is prevalent for all automation fronts, whether you're web or mobile. So we have so many tests, but we have so little time. So there's a capacity restraint on testers. So we're so quick to get the functionality working. We're so quick to develop the functionality of an application, and then we're ready to push to production. And then here we have the next sprint cycle or what have you. That way you're just continuously developing, you're continuously testing that development. So there is a capacity restraint. So the time allocated for automation is very limited. It's kind of not, the previous trend has been more, if you can get to automation, great, but it wasn't really prioritized. It wasn't really kind of brought into the conversation from as early as setting those prerequisites, setting those, business requirements to hit. It was more of, if you have time, great. If not, but here we find ourselves, especially manual testers, we don't have time. And so many tests, so little time. Not to mention that the mobile, like I mentioned previously, the mobile environment is just complex. So it's requiring multiple testing scenarios. So you have new devices, you have new operating system on those devices. It can get very splintered very quickly in that device fragmentation. There are features constantly being released to keep up with. So there's more tests to write. And of course, as I'm alluding to, less time to write them. And with that complexity and less time makes it hard to deliver stable code. So if you do find yourself, you have time to automate a test case, you want to ensure that if you do it so quickly and you kind of do it haphazardly, it's not going to be the best stable code. And that is kind of proves itself pointless in a sense if you get false negatives, false positives, etc. That stable code that needs to that stable code that continuously runs in parallel, again, hard to kind of set up and achieve. So we have less time to automate, even more or less time to maintain that automation. And so it just feels like we have the cards stacked against us when trying to adopt a mobile test automation approach or strategy. With that, we also have just limitations in the open source framework. So Appium is fantastic. Appium, again, can really drive any test case on a mobile device. But there's the functionality of Appium that can't quite keep up with, one, the development of mobile apps, and two, again, that complexity of those mobile applications. So that's one of the biggest challenges and why more than 70% of teams have not automated their mobile testing. So if you yourself are on a mobile team and you have not achieved mobile test automation or that CI/CD dream, you're not alone. Again, majority of teams are in the same boat as you are. And a good bit to do with that is these open source frameworks struggle to keep up with the technologies and environments. So if you think about Face ID and those biometrics, it's really hard to automate that. It's hard to automate scrolling and swiping. And so you're not just finding an element and clicking on it. Now you need to scroll down a screen, and that itself can be hard to automate. You also have varying conditions, varying network conditions, locations, and other kind of virtualized services that are hard to mimic or hard to kind of spoof within automation. And then you also have limited automation capabilities. So with limited automation capabilities comes more manual testing. And as I showed in my previous slide, that increased and manual testing debt takes up your time, and now you have a decreased time to automate. So that never-ending checklist of manual testing is too real, and so it's difficult to further automate or find the time to automate your test cases within mobile application development and testing. As I kind of alluded to previously, your automation is only as good as it is stable and reliable. If you only have a couple of hours or such to kind of throw a test case together, and it's not the most sound code, again, you're getting false positives and false negatives, that can be proven to be counterproductive. So automation in general can be extremely brittle and flaky, just kind of, again, at the expense of these open source frameworks and kind of how we're able to interact with elements on the page. Not to mention here, we are now introducing more layered applications. So it's not just a flat kind of CSS anymore. It's more layered of these applications that make it difficult to interact with a lot of elements from an automation standpoint. With that brings very brittle and flaky tests. And then mobile test automation adds the more stability issues given the complexity. So again, false positives, false negatives due to the environment, due to device stability, Wi-Fi stability, network stability, biometric stability, etc. And that can lead to scripting instability and brittleness. On top of that, maintenance of automation can be excruciating and time consuming. And it also can be proven to be a little counterproductive and kind of just you end up spinning your wheels and wasting that valuable time, that time that you need to get through that never-ending manual test checklist. Here you are finding you have got started on mobile test automation. You're finding that it's super brittle and flaky. Anytime a developer introduces a new button or some sort of layout to the page, it then knocks out the XML and knocks out all your test cases. And now you have to maintain those test cases, go back in, find the correct technical identifier, mainly to put in the effort to maintain that test script. And then what's going to happen the next release? You're going to find yourself in the same similar situation. So mobile test automation can be very difficult because of this. And then there are some additional challenges. So of course we can talk test automation all day long, but I think a lot of people also kind of fail to not acknowledge, but kind of see these quality blind spots. So these quality blind spots that can be introduced due to test automation flakiness. So maybe your test case passed, but did it really pass? You have that false positive and you're not handling that. That can create a blind spot as well. And sometimes trying to maintain that, you end up getting very bloated test suites. And that add duration, add time to the CI test cycle and the regression cycle. So if you have these bloated test suites and these test cases that have so much code in it because you're trying to make sure that it's stable and reliable and you're putting in assertions here, there, and everything, that adds to the execution time. It's not as streamlined or efficient. And so those are some other challenges to face as well, as those quality blind spots. Another thing that we'll actually get into in just a moment is out of sync best practices. So tool selection, how to instrument multiple tools, really creating that tech stack that works best for you and your team. Adopting a practice to agree upon. Do you want to do behavior-driven testing? Do you want to do TDD testing or other type of methodologies? And then this can impact the health of testing and automation as well. And as I mentioned previously, or just a moment ago, that device fragmentation, that literal splintering of devices and operating systems that you need to account for. And so with that can really be hindrance to adopting mobile test automation as well, because that adds to that never-ending manual checklist of needing to test on this operating service, maybe, or system, needing to test on that operating system. Now we have it for 2 different platforms, for Android and iOS. So in addition to these complexities, device availability is a huge blocker for testing and automation. So with this wide range of devices, they have different screen resolutions, different versions to consider, different features to consider. I know emulators and simulators are a great tool and resource, and I'm absolutely not saying not to use emulators and simulators, because they do help bridge that gap. But they come with their own disadvantages. One of those disadvantages is being, it's more of a vanilla operating system. It's doesn't account for the full complexity. Or emulators and simulators, they cannot mimic real world scenarios. So if you're automated, finally got a test case automated, you run an emulator, checks out, looks great. You run on a real device, turns out your application is, killing the battery of a real device, and that you didn't account for that within your automation. So you're always able to make use of real devices. Highly recommend to make use of both emulators, simulators, and real devices. But even real devices come at an expense, as well, as it's hard to maintain. They can be very costly. I think one device now is, we're at up to $1,200 for a device. So it comes at a cost, and it's hard to maintain physical resources. So all that being known, kind of looking at the challenges of mobile test automation, the complexity of mobile applications and mobile devices, you might feel like you're at a loss of how can I achieve mobile test automation. So we can take a moment to kind of go through the best automation strategy and approaches. And then really what ultimately will happen is you yourself sitting down with your team and open that communication up and get on the same page with what tools you want to move forward, get a plan of action based on the best approaches and strategy, and move forward from there and execute. Before I dive into that, just wanted to throw in another poll question really quickly. So what percentage of your test cases are automated today? Is it less than 10%? And let's say your test cases incorporate your regression suite. So we can also reword this saying, what percentage of your regression suite is automated today? Is it less than 10%? Is it 10% to 24%? Is it 25% to 49%? Is it 50% to 75%? Or do you have more than 75 of your test cases automated? And I'll just give that a moment for everyone to answer. All right. I will say for myself as an automation engineer, we probably had only about a quarter automated. So that was between the 10 to 24% automated. As I mentioned previously, less than 70% of teams have achieved mobile test automation. So I imagine that the average number probably around half or less. Okay. And then my next question for the poll is actually going to be, what percentage of test cases would you like to have automated? I guess is it less than 10%? Is that 10 to 24, 24 to 49, 50 to 75, or more than 70? Would you like to have more than 75% of your test cases automated? Of course, maybe a little bit of a trick question. We want more than 75% of our test cases automated. With that, we can implement that into our CI/CD pipeline. We can really help orchestrate the deployment process. So with that CI/CD pipeline in place, with more than 75% test cases automated, you can achieve that continuous integration and continuous development, as well as catching more defects prior to pushing to production, given test automation in place. With more than 75% test cases automated, you have a lot more time to focus on automation further. Maybe with the goal intent to reach 100%, or at the same time, you also have time to kind of make use of that or chip away at that never-ending manual test cases that need to get done. All right, we can take a moment to kind of look at what your team may be missing. So one thing to make note is communication. So communication on a valid strategy, communication on the best practices. Once again, that communication agreeing upon the best testing approach. So again, are you BDD, are you TDD, etc. By having a testing approach defined within your team, you can move forward and see what are the best tools and frameworks to support that approach. That also you want to ensure that meets your team's skill set. So this includes the full software development cycle team. So developers as well as testers. Maybe you have your developers implementing unit and integration tests. You want to ensure that the tools that they're using for their unit and integration tests to automate their unit and integration tests also work well with the tools that you might be using to automate your UI. So you want to find a cohesive tool stack that's not going to hinder your testing efforts. It will increase that productivity of your testing efforts, and that really works best for you and really streamline that efficient strategy. So all of that stems from communication. So just sitting with your team, communicating that with your team on the best, again, the testing approach, the tools and frameworks that support that testing approach. And then you don't want to choose a tool that has this huge learning curve for your manual tester, because then that just adds more time for them to kind of, combat that learning curve. You want to have a tool that they themselves will have, be able to jump into and make use of. And these tools to, of course, easily integrate with one another as well. So want to, again, have that cohesive tool stack. You also want to have a complete instrumentation of needed tools. So which automation framework works best for you and your team. And with that comes into, there's a lot of things to consider in a tool when looking at tools and frameworks. We want to look at monitor and maintenance via reports and dashboards. Look at tools to extract flaky and problematic tests, so that suites can stay healthy as possible. So the strategy and process, you want to have your measurements and metrics in place. So you have key performance indicators, so KPIs, can help you stay on track of just that, your metrics and your measurements. This helps you set your goals for your test automation approach and strategy. Within this sprint cycle, I want to increase my percentage of test cases automated by, say, 10%. Maybe, of course, set small goals to get started. So really understanding why you're making the move to automation. So what percentage of test cases do you want to automate by then and when? And then on a month-to-month basis, as you look at these KPIs, and you can reflect back on, okay, what didn't go well that I could not achieve this goal? What did go well that I was able to get close to achieving, but maybe we need to make some attunements, some changes here and there. So KPIs can really help you stay on track to ensure that your testing strategy that you're executing is efficient and working the best for you in that nature. How will you measure automation success? And then do you measure the ROI, so the return of investment? And as I mentioned in my previous slide, you really want that QA, Dev, and DevOps alignment. So that communication, how would your automation strategy work with DevOps? Will you be implementing continuous testing? How will the test results be fed back to developers? So, and on top of that, how will your tests be not even fed back to developers, but also within your metrics to ensure that you're on an efficient approach? And then with this approach, what's your budget? Open frameworks are fantastic, but there's a lot of great tools in the market as well, such as artificial intelligence, that can help you adopt mobile test automation far faster than the traditional scripted route using open source frameworks, but they come at a subscription cost. So what is your budget? And then how you make the business case to management. So looking at that ROI and that return of investment. Do you need a single platform or use best of breed solutions? I think a single platform is fantastic if you can be a one-stop shop, but I don't want you to limit yourself to just one tool when a lot of the tools in the market or in the space can work very close with one another. And then is scripted or scriptless a better approach for you? And that's really going to be relevant to how familiar you are with mobile test automation. You could be a quality analyst turned quality engineer turned automation engineer, where you're familiar with scripted automation and you can really hit the ground running in scripting that architecture, scripting from the ground up, mobile test automation. More times than not, it's a lot of manual testers looking to get their toes wet in the automation space. And this is where scriptless is a fantastic solution for those users, because scriptless, you can do just that. You can automate your test cases, but you don't have to have that huge learning curve of coding and syntax and things of that nature. You can kick off scriptless without having to write a single line of code and be able to automate your test cases. So with that, we're going to set some goals and prioritize automation. So as I also mentioned, you can make use of KPIs to help set and track goals for implementing automation. And then I would recommend the best approach is to set the goals, set small digestible goals and then move forward from there. So let's look at your most critical test cases. Let's automate those first. With those critical test cases automated, we could kick off that, what we call a smoke test suite or like a health check suite. So with these critical test cases, automating those first, the moment a developer pushes to the test environment, you can kick off that smoke test suite. And if any one of those fail, then kick it back to the developers, because with that being a critical test case, the application would not work in its entirety if a critical test case fails. So I would recommend automating critical test cases first, implementing that smoke test suite or that regression suite, or I'm sorry, not regression. Smoke test suite is a subset of the regression suite. Or I mentioned automating that health check suite just to ensure that the next version of the application functionally works as expected, that you can move forward in automating. Or if any one of those fails, it needs more attention from the developers. So let's catch that. As the farthest we shift left, the sooner we can catch those, the better. And the more the more return of, not I would say return of investment, but essentially catching those defects sooner will really help the software development life cycle versus catching it by the end of regression or catching it. Hopefully it won't be caught, hopefully a critical test case doesn't make it into production. Of course, we're not perfect. Could it very well happen. But once again, get those critical test cases automated first. And then once those are automated, start working on the rest of the test cases to move forward to a complete automated regression suite. You can do this by making automating a test case a part of the done criteria. So in an agile methodology, there's the full software development lifecycle, the kind of the infinity sign, where you need to plan first. So planning usually involves meeting with stakeholders and business stakeholders, coming to agreement on the functionality of this application. What is the intent of this application? How will this application function? Each story will have, each enhancement will have business requirements to meet. Once those business requirements are laid out, then it gets into coding and development. And I don't want to say then gets to testing. Testing should be done throughout the entire process. And so with that, if you have a new enhancement coming down your pipeline that you need to test the functionality of, work through that manual test case, test the functionality of that feature before creating that ticket as done and moving it into the backlog or moving it into archive. Go ahead and automate that test case and implement that into your done criteria. So not only is the functionality manually tested through, but the functionality is also now automated, and we can go ahead and close out that ticket. On top of automating critical test cases first, moving forward from critical test cases, I highly recommend automating end-to-end tests. So end-to-end tests is, let's say you have a checkout flow for an e-commerce application. You search for an item, you select that item, you place that item in the cart, you check out, you pay for your item, and you get a confirmation of a receipt. With having all that UI automated, as well as drilling into the API and database within that script itself, creating that end-to-end test case, you are hitting every part of that more testing triangle. The UI, the API, the database, microservices on the back end. If that end-to-end test completes and is a positive or passes, then that gives you confidence that not only is the UI automated, there's no UI defects, but all the way through the back-end services, those are working as expected as well. If I take that item and I check out and I double check the database that sure enough, I get a confirmation of a receipt sent, then I have confidence knowing that that end-to-end test has passed, as well as, once again, the UI and all microservices behind it have passed as well. So instead of taking small test cases here and there, so of course you need to test the API as well as the database, and of course you need to test the UI. But if you have 3 different automated test cases, you could combine those into one test case, and now you have one test case to really ensure that that flow is working as expected from the UI all the way down to the microservices in the back end into the database. So I make use of automating end-to-end tests to really kind of be efficient in your automation versus having multiple smaller test cases here and there. And then as well as setting the goal to automate your critical test cases first, and then as well as kind of implementing automation into the done criteria for a new enhancement or a new feature that's coming down the pipeline. So really setting goals and really kind of understanding what needs to be prioritized in automation so that you can then execute and move forward in your efforts. You can make use of your KPIs to say, hey, that actually worked really well. Let's do that again for the next sprint. Or you could say, you know what, I only got X amount automated. There are a lot of false negatives or false positives. Let's reconsider this approach. Okay, key benefits to test automation. So clearly a big time saver. So if you look at one manual test case that takes you maybe 7 minutes to manually perform, when you have that automated test case, now it'll probably take 2 minutes. So you're really saving that time from a manual perspective going to an automated perspective. When you automate functional test cases, you have better quality. When you automate performance, you have better efficiency. When you automate, you can even automate or ensure that user experiences, is a positive user experience that has better reception to your users that will make them want to continue using your application. If you have a certain, say, login flow, that e-commerce checkout flow, if you make it to the item in your bag and you're ready to check out, if the checkout button is this small on the bottom left corner and you can't see it, that flow is not as intuitive. That's not the most positive user experience. And it is little things like that, unfortunately, that can make a user say, I don't understand what I have to do next. This application confuses me. I'm going to delete it and move to the competitor application. So user experience we're finding in this space is a big scenario to test through to ensure that your application is receptive to users, and you do have the ability to automate that as well. So just automating that flow, that maybe that end-to-end test flow, to make sure that it all checks out and that your users won't have any difficulties within that flow. Implementing mobile test automation, you have a lower cost overall within a development team. Again, big time saver. You work by the hours. The automation will save those hours worked so that you can spend more hours on other scenarios or other testing efforts, other maybe more manual testing. It also solves the issue of repetitive and tedious manual testing. So at the end of a 2-week sprint, you have to run the full regression suite. I know regression can take anywhere between an hour if it's a small app to like 8 hours if it's a larger application. And that could be even from an automated standpoint, can be that lengthy in time. Some regression suites can take up to 2-3 days to do. Some regressions take up to a week, 2 weeks to perform. So having to run that manually, sprint after sprint after sprint, can be very tedious and can kind of just be, it's almost like watching paint dry sometimes. It's not ideal to have to be expected to redo the same manual test case over and over and over again. That's why it's always best to automate that. So you can do one automation, kick it off, and be done with it. Also allows teams to deliver faster while upholding quality that in turn brings in more revenue. So you're catching more defects via automation, shifting the farthest left. You can get to market faster. You have minimal defects making it into production. And that overall will bring more revenue as users are really, really enjoying making use of your application. And then you can get more features out in a timely manner as well. And then automation has always been the name of the game in testing, but again, it can be very difficult to achieve. Okay, so let's take a moment to consider choosing the right automation tool. This is going to be in the realms of, do you go the scripted automation approach? Do you go a scriptless automation approach? So I just want to take a moment to kind of look at, compare these two. So if you're not familiar with scriptless automation, scriptless is usually AI driven. So the AI is kind of automating the automation process for you. So you can run one manual session. The AI is either capturing that session or creating a lot of kind of if-then strings to recreate that session to kick off on other devices. So they call it low code, no code. Again, natural language that you don't have to write a single line of code, essentially. The AI is doing the automation for you. So when we look at scripted and scriptless, so the pros to scripted automation, so the traditional approach, so really coding out line by line of what it is you're looking to drive on a mobile device, and ensure that test case is working as expected. So pros of scripted automation, you have far more control of your automation from a programmatic perspective. You're not the hands of AI. You can make assertions, you can make API calls, you make database calls, etc. So again, you have more control within a scripted automation perspective. You can combine the UI and the API database to really achieve that end-to-end testing. And then with that, you can run tests in parallel. It could be a little tricky to set up, but you're also able to accomplish the continuous integration and continuous development. So of course, as we were mentioning previously, the cons of that is slow and time consuming, tedious to code out, flaky and inconsistent, kind of literally all these challenges we had just spoken to. Hard to maintain, hard to convert a manual test case into a reliable automation. So again, scripted really comes with its drawbacks also. And then scriptless automation. So pros of scriptless, it's fast, it's easy for anyone. You don't have to be an automation engineer or a software developer and test to make use of scriptless automation. So more user friendly to be able to kick off and scale your automation across multiple devices just based on one manual session. So easy to set up and from a manual to automation conversion. You can run once, test anywhere in parallel. It does come with its own baked in assertions to help you catch more defects faster, easier to maintain. You can also implement this into your CI/CD pipeline, and you do have the ability to convert scriptless into scripted use cases or a script for further use. The con to that is that you lose that control. You're now at the expense of the AI, and the AI is more coming from a UI perspective, like a top down. So it's hard for you to kind of drill into API calls and data and end-to-end tests and database calls essentially with scriptless automation. Again, because of that top layer automation, it's hard to automate additional testing. You might be thinking kind of which one would you choose? The answer is you don't have to. Well, of course, the answer is one. Previously, when implementing or kind of getting started in that strategy, what is your budget? Because more times than not, scriptless does come at a subscription price. So it has a lot of great features and a lot of great positives in making use of it, but only if your budget allows. So that's one question you need to ask yourself of which tool to use. What does your budget look like? If you have the resources to make use of both, I would highly recommend in doing just that. So you have scripted automation for your API tests, for your end-to-end database tests. You can really kind of get into the nitty-gritty within scripted. But then if you're really looking to automate your UI and really hit the ground running before the next push to production, scriptless is a great option as well. So proper way of executing this test automation approach. So differentiating test cases for manual and versus automated. So which ones can I automate? Which ones need to leave manual? So in a perfect world, it's ideal to automate all test cases. However, given the complexity, sometimes it's not possible. So it's important to automate all test cases that you have the ability to, that your framework that you're working with supports that test case complexity that you're looking to automate. If not, then unfortunately that'll be left as a manual test case. So test cases involving biometrics, for example, image injection. So wanting to ensure that the camera functionality on your application, mobile application on your mobile device correctly inputs, say, a QR code or a bank check or what have you, that's working as expected. That can be very hard to automate. If you need to spoof any location services or make use of SMS or push notifications, those are just additional complexities that are hard to automate, and they might get left as a manual test case. So you have your set of test cases. Let's say you have 75% that you can automate. Now you're just left to only 25% that you might need to do on a manual basis, come regression or come just testing through the functionality. But 25% manual is far better than having to do 100% manual. So of course, automate the test cases that you have the ability and that support to automate those test cases. As I mentioned just before, combining best of both worlds. So if you have if your budget allows for additional resources, especially those at a subscription price, recommend using best of both worlds. So at the end of each development cycle, you can have both scripted and scriptless test cases that can still be involved in your CI/CD pipeline. You can use scriptless for your UI tests and your end-to-end test and really help making use of artificial intelligence to catch visual discrepancies, text discrepancies, anything that might be different from a UI perspective brought to your attention. You can do that far faster using scriptless, and it's easier to use also. So you can really hit that ground running, really scale your automation across multiple devices and automate the UI via scriptless automation. And then you can use scripted for your API and additional tests. You have more control in your script. You can really attune your script to meet the requirements, to essentially assert that those requirements are met in your functional testing or even in non-functional testing as well. With best of both worlds combined, you have that increased your testing coverage, and you're able to scale your automation also. So together, both solutions help you save time, money, and resources. Even though you're invested in that subscription price, the return of investment is so much greater that it essentially nulls itself or equals itself out. So these resources, and then that can be calculated in the ROI of mobile test automation. And then just quickly looking at the testing pyramid. So as I mentioned, you have unit test, integration test kind of at the bottom. So just making sure your code is functionally working. More times than not, that's done by developers and software developers and test. But as we get kind of higher on the, and as you know that as developers and or software developers and test are automating that, it's a fast approach with less money to invest in. It's more of just investing into, your hours spent doing it. As we move up, we have API tests, we have our end-to-end test and our UI test on top of that we can automate. Even those can be done very fast as well, making use of scriptless and scripted. But again, scriptless coming at a subscription price might be a little bit more costly coming from the top down, unless you're using just all open framework. But making use of this testing approach and having that complete testing coverage, you can actually get 100% testing coverage in the fastest time possible. And again, that fastest time, faster and efficient releases leads to less bugs in production. It saves you money, time, and resources. So making use of the tools that work best for you. Don't silo yourself or put yourself into, oh, I can only use this tool. I can only use scripted automation. I can only use scriptless automation. Again, find the approach that works best for you, making use of all tools and frameworks, and really see what plays nice with one another and what can implement an efficient test strategy approach. And if something within this approach, if something doesn't go as expected, or maybe something's a little bit, takes a little bit longer than you expected, then you can tweak it and fine tune it. And again, really work in iterations to find the best mobile test automation to achieve the dream that is fully automating your test cases and implementing that into a CI/CD pipeline. And that is all for the discussion today. I do have a moment here for any questions. Feel free to ask your questions in the chat.
All right. Thanks again for the presentation. So one of the questions that comes to mind is, are there examples of test cases that should not be automated?
Yes. So those, like I mentioned, those test cases that should not be automated are the ones that you don't have the resources to automate, maybe given the complexity of it. So, face recognition, for example, that's difficult to automate. So that would be a test case to leave manual.
Okay. And what would be required to export existing automation scripts from other vendors to be imported into Kobaton?
Kobaton supports a wide range of other test automation frameworks. So on real devices, Kobaton supports the Appium framework that really helps combat that device fragmentation. Also supports the more native frameworks such as XUI Test and Espresso. And then there's a lot of other kind of vendors that have their own automation that, Kobaton makes it easy to do just that, making use of real devices. At Kobaton, we don't want to take away from any tool stack. We want to be able to seamlessly integrate in any existing tool stack, so that once again, that tool stack is kind of synergizing and working with one another to give out the most efficient testing approach.
Right. Okay. And are there any other key points that you'd like our audience to come away with?
Just that once again, for mobile test automation, you're not alone in this. It can be very difficult across the board. A lot of people kind of aren't able to adopt mobile test automation. So again, find what works best for you. Really open up that communication, and that communication your team needs to start as early as the planning portion of the cycle.
Okay, it looks like that's all that we have for the questions for now. Thank you all for this presentation. Again, that was Shannon Lee, Solutions Engineer and DevOps Evangelist at Kobaton. I would also like to thank Kobaton for sponsoring today's webinar, as well as the attendees for joining us. All right, everyone take care.
Thank you all so much.
Bye.